Today, we are looking at logic model development. We asked that all of you either attend the Utilizing Logic Models webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago, or view the recording, or take the self-paced course. And today we have joining us Samantha Flory and Cynthia Smith. Edie's unable to join us. And I'm going to advance to the next slide. Samantha is a training and technical assistance coordinator, and Cynthia is an evaluation specialist and program planning coordinator. They're both with the Friends Center for Community-Based Child Abuse Prevention. And so our aim today is to provide specific support for you. So the goal today was to ideally come with the draft of a logic model, some notes around your logic model, basically whatever you have, wherever you're at progress-wise on your logic model, to be able to have some discussion both with our facilitators as well as with others that are working on logic models in order to make some progress today. And so that's going to be broken into basically two parts. The first part is going to be content driven, where we are going to go over some slides. The second part will be essentially workshopping within a small group to actually look at and work on your logic models and to see others working on their logic models. So we're going to move to the next slide. And I'm going to hand this off to Samantha and Cynthia.
I think this is my time to just kind of briefly talk to you all why you have to do a logic model. Maybe kind of put it back in context again. Many of you know you're required to provide either a theory of change or a logic model. And what I provided for you in the chat actually is an example of both a theory of change and a logic model for a kinship care navigation program. So you may be considering that as part of your comprehensive prevention plan in your county. This is a great article that was actually developed by the federal government and actually shows you both a theory of change and a logic model. But for this particular purpose, Friends trains really around the logic model. And one reason why is because logic models generally tend to be a bit more simplified and tend to be logical based rather than necessarily causally based. So when we think about prevention planning, for many of our programs, we don't necessarily have a causal path for the outcomes that we achieve. And so really the logic model is just that way to describe the activities and intended outcomes for children, youth, parents, caregivers, and families, those people that are receiving your services, or in your position, the entire array of services, activities, and programming that you're doing as part of your plan. So the logic model really is just designed to help connect the goals of your cross-sector partnership so that it aligns with the intent of both the state and federal legislation. Next slide. So what does a logic model do? Well, believe it or not, it's a template. It can actually provide as planning services. So many of you are just literally in the throes of your planning, and that's great. That's where a logic model is really super important. You normally don't want to wait to do your logic model till after you've planned things. You really want to do it while you're doing that planning piece. And so it makes sense to do a logic model now, even before it's due on January 31st of 2023. So it's really important to start now. But logic models are also really important for implementing those services, evaluating those services, and the eventual reporting of the outcomes for those services. Next slide. But I really want you to think about logic models as a drawing board. Please don't assume that logic models are designed to be a one-time, I did it, woo, I'm done. Logic models really are kind of that opportunity to go back, review things. Logic models really should be done in consultation with your partners as well, your stakeholders that are involved in your plans. So it really is important to think about your direct service staff, management, and consumers. You also want to think about using the logic models to help inform your service selection, your implementation, and evaluation. But most of all, I hope that you get to use your logic models around the continuous quality improvement process, because it really is a time for you to think about what worked in the first 3 months, how can we tweak things to make them better, and then think about, revisiting your logic model. It's a living document that should be revisited and altered as needed. Next slide. So what were the components that we taught you all as part of that previous training? There are 8 components to a logic model. And you may be thinking, geez, Cynthia, there's 8. Yes, some logic models have 8, some don't have 8, but at least from Friends' perspective, we find that these 8 components can be really helpful, whether you're talking about this from a program perspective, specific service programs, or even from a planning perspective, which many of you are in right now. So the first component there is the vision. And as you all have been presenting your missions, remember the vision is really kind of that overall vision of the comprehensive prevention plan. It may or may not be directly connected to your mission. It probably is, but it really should be reflective of the overall outcomes that you are trying to achieve with your comprehensive prevention plan. So really think about what is that overall outcome. It may or may not be measurable by you personally or by the members in your collaboration, but it really should be kind of that overall pie in the sky. This is what we want to achieve with our comprehensive prevention plan. Your vision should also then drive the target population. You really need to be thinking about, and again, I loved how you talked about the data planning and coming up with, where we get our data, how do we use those data, because that's really going to drive the target population you're looking at, as well as those population needs. So be sure to think about attending that particular training, because I really do think it's going to be helpful for that target population needs. From there, you want to then focus on the service strategies. And by service strategies, we're not necessarily talking literally just about those evidence-based programs, but really thinking about what are the services that are part of those evidence-based programs. Is it a 12-week, 1-hour program? Really kind of identifying, distinguishing specifically what do the programs provide service-wise for the families and children that are being served by those services. From there, when you're thinking about services, you really need to be thinking about the resources that you have and the resources that you need as part of being able to implement those services, and in particular, your evidence-based practices with fidelity. So you think about what are the resources we currently have, what are the resources we need, but what's really going to drive that decision around the service planning, as well as what resources you need, are some of the assumptions that we generally tend to make. And as you recall, in the training that we provided to you on October 20th, we really did highlight for you some ways to research those assumptions. So when you are continuing to think about the services that you're going to be implementing as part of your comprehensive prevention plan, you want to make sure that you're doing your research on those services as well to identify what those assumptions are. From there, you're then going to develop those outcomes, and those outcomes are super important. As you all may remember from the training, we did identify 3 different types of outcomes. There's short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. You'll recall that short-term outcomes really are kind of the engagement, where some logic models may refer to those as outputs. Friends generally refers to those as short-term outcomes. So you have the engagement outcomes. How many families participated? What does engagement look like? How many times do they have to attend in order for it to be a significant engagement? You also then have your intermediate outcomes, which really are focusing more on action-oriented. What kind of change did you begin to see with your clients, with your families and children that you're serving? And then the longer term outcomes really are those outcomes in which you are really being able to see change over time, and ways that families are really taking in the information and really making those long-term changes in their behaviors, skill sets, attitudes, whatever your prevention plan may be trying to incorporate when you think about outcomes. So from outcomes, then we talked a little bit about indicators. And here we kind of quickly went through, because again, what you find is that in some logic models, you may find indicators, in some logic models you don't. Again, the way that Friends trains, we really do recommend coming up with some indicators. And these are really those statements that you think you would see if your outcomes were achieved. So if we really reach the outcomes that we are intending, what is it exactly we would see? And so many times what you'll find is that indicators can have what we call benchmarks. And these may be things like 80% of families will do X, Y, and Z at the end of the service. We don't necessarily say that you have to include benchmarks or those numbers, but if you do, I want to caution you to think about making them realistic and making sure that when you do indicate those specific benchmarks, that you are looking at what the research has shown, particularly for those evidence-based practices. So again, it really goes back to those assumptions you're making in that research that you're doing to help drive those indicators. And then the last thing, again, what you would find in the logic model and the training that we provided was the measurement tools. We really do encourage you to think about utilizing your logic model as that evaluation plan as well. And certainly your evaluation plan could be much more expansive and more complex, but certainly your logic model can also identify the measurement tools that you're going to be utilizing to identify those indicators. So that's an opportunity there. So with that, I know that's a lot of information to throw at you in literally less than 5 minutes, but I wanted to make sure that we all kind of came back to the acknowledging what the 8 components of the logic model. I'll turn it back over to Samantha.
Thank you, Cynthia. And so what we want to do is we want to spend some time with all of you. And we talked about this when we were together October 20th. And I know you received reminders as well from Caltrin about this. This is really now your opportunity to ask us questions. You have Cynthia and I both here as experts to ask questions, help with any maybe sticking points that you may have as you started thinking about a logic model for your program or your county. We want to be able to just kind of talk that through with all of you. And as a reminder, and Cynthia mentioned this earlier, you don't have to have this complete and ready to go when you leave this workshop in an hour today. But we want to get you well on your way so that you can have this logic model to be a part of your larger plan that is due at the end of January. So this is a really good point to be working on the logic model, refining it. And as Cynthia mentioned, you also want to be getting input from other stakeholders. So you may be here today and you may be working on a draft of the logic model, but knowing that you're going to take this and talk to other people about it, whether it's your community partners, parents that are involved in your programs, other people within your organization, staff, but knowing that you need to have that input to help inform this logic model. So it doesn't just stand with you and you alone, but what we really want to have available for you today is that opportunity to talk it through both with Cynthia and I, but also with your peers. We're happy to keep answering questions right now, but in the spirit of sharing resources, I know Jennifer was just sharing too, and we shared these on the last webinar, but some of you may not have been there in October, but up on our friends website, we've got some really good resources around evaluation planning, measurement tools. We do have, and this is something that Caltrin had sent out to you all. We have a logic model builder that you can do up on our website, as well as an online learning center course on logic models. And really recommend that you take that, especially if you weren't with us on October 20th. And it'll walk you through how to put together the logic model, what it looks like. And it's just a really good resource for you all to have when it comes to creating logic models. We have some other online learning center courses too, if you're interested, just exploring Friends resources, but wanted to specifically point out that logic model one. You also can refer other people to take this if you're going to be partnering with people in creating your logic model and they haven't been a part of what we've been doing these last couple of trainings. You can refer them over to our website and say, well, maybe you want to check out this online learning course and get to know them a little bit better.
One of the resources you shared is one I use all the time when we're doing assistance work, and that's that compendium of outcomes and indicators. It's so helpful because sometimes you just need help with like, how do you word that to make it like, it just gives you ideas. And I think Li Wei was asking earlier, like, how do you come up with some of these things? Like there's tons of examples. So you kind of find something similar to what you're doing and maybe shift the wording a little bit, but it's another place you can go and you can search. It's super easy to use. That's that menu of outcomes and indicators. And then if you're looking for tools, how are you going to measure these things? Here's a bunch of tools that are very applicable to child welfare and similar populations.
We've tried to give you all everything we can on our website so that you can go take a look. You just go to our general friends nrc.org and you click on the evaluation tab. You're going to find all of this information up there. It's just really helpful. So, and of course, you can always contact Cynthia and I as well anytime with questions, especially after I know some of you are kind of noodling around a lot of things today. And if things may come up later and you think, oh gosh, I really want to just check in about that, you are always welcome to reach out to us. For our information, we included Edie here. Those of you that were with us October 20th, Edie is also a wealth of knowledge related to this. She just wasn't able to join today. But any of the three of us are happy to kind of help you wade through this if you still have some more questions. And just want to check in one last
Excellent.
time that there
Cynthia?
aren't any more questions or comments before we start to wrap up. Oops, sorry.
The other thing that I would really encourage, particularly since you are working in-house, is, and I know I've seen some familiar faces today on the learning series webinars and those Q&As, but use that chat in those webinars. It's an underutilized resource. And what I mean by that is you have counties, literally all of the counties in California are typically on those webinars. And in early webinars, I think what we see is the state and technical assistance groups sort of providing information. And we're still seeing that. But what we're starting to see is counties who are moving along in the process and who are more able to say, oh, yes, we have a draft of that, or, oh, our group just approved a version of that. And so if there are things that you're working on where you say, gosh, it would be nice to kind of borrow from somebody else or to see what somebody else is doing, whether they're next door or whether they're a bigger county, but start actually putting some specific questions, as in, we're finishing up or working on our logic model. Can somebody share examples of where they're at? And they may have it immediately, or you may be able to directly communicate in the chat to say, hey, could you, if it's not approved, could you just send me a draft? But definitely be using other counties, because what are, Jennifer, how many counties? We've got 40,
I think
48,
50,
50 that are doing
50
this?
opted in.
50 that are doing this right now.
And I think
So there really
most of
is,
them are doing MI. So it might be a great place to start sharing, again, indicators, resources, training. Yeah.
this is a place where sparking a discussion that leads to peer sharing is actually really useful, because it will be more efficient in the end for many counties if they're able to share. And we ideally will start to see some of those things and we'll include them in our resources as well. But if you're looking for something specific, ask the question and see who pops up that has something where you can borrow or share. I'm going to go ahead and drop the survey. We do really appreciate responses. It helps us to sort of figure out what was useful, what you want more of, specific to FFPS, but just in terms of child and family serving organizations in general, whether it's for your workforce, for you, for leadership development. So take a few minutes to tell us about this workshop, but also what your needs are in general. And in terms of upcoming workshops, do sign up for that data playbook workshop. It will be, I think, super helpful to this specific topic. And then the November 16th, putting it all together webinar, which is the last webinar in the planning learning series before we all get back together again on February 1st for the kickoff of the implementation series. And we'll have information about that, I think, in the next couple of weeks, probably at that last webinar. So I'm going to drop that in the, oh, Jennifer has already dropped it in the chat. Fantastic. So thank you all for coming today, and Samantha and Cynthia especially, thank you for joining us and lending your expertise for the day. I think it was really appreciated.